Yo, what's up, good people? Garrett Sisti here. Jamie Hoyle, of course. And before we get just a little quick recognition, I think this isn't for sure yet, but if you're listening to this podcast, this will be our very last podcast on Bolts from the Blue. We'll be going on our own. Hopefully, everything works out with the feed, and we'll give you more information when we get all that. But just to let you know, we will be done over at Bolts from the Blue. This will be the last little audio podcast you'll get over there. We will still be here on YouTube for those that are watching now. And anybody else listening, everything should be okay. And hopefully we'll have a nice transition. But this will be it. A little bittersweet, but Jamie and I will be on our own from here on out.
Yeah, end of an era. 8 years at Bolts from the Blue. It's hard to believe we've been there that long.
Yeah, I know. So thanks for all of you guys for listening and everybody that's helped us throughout the way, along our way through this whole podcasting journey. 300 plus episodes later, 8 years later, we're still here. Another off season, and we are here to talk about free agency. So we'll talk about. We're gonna. If you guys are new here to the channel or listening to this podcast or whatever, Jamie and I are going to go through every free agent. We're going to talk about unrestricted free agents, restricted free agents, exclusive rights free agents. We'll go over hopefully some contract restructures that the Chargers can go to because their cap space is currently in the negative. We'll talk about some cuts the Chargers can make, maybe some contract restructures, and we'll go over all that. We'll talk about, whether we think they deserve another contract with the Chargers, though, again, they're strapped for cash, so it's a little bit different. But we are going to be talking about whether we would re-sign them, whether we think the Chargers will re-sign them, and then also give you what we think they're going to get on the open market. Jamie and I every year do our little our research, and we compare contracts to the recent contracts and players of that caliber and in that sphere. So we're going to go over all that, and we'll go in very grave detail here. So we are going to start that off shortly. But to kick it off, before we get into free agency, we got to talk about some coaching updates because since the last time we recorded, the Chargers have had some moves. At least nothing official yet, but let's just jump into it. So the Chargers' former defensive coordinator Ronaldo Hill is going to Miami as the passing game coordinator under Vic Fangio. And for those of you that are part of the Lightning Round Discord, you guys already got this information, but we can give you a little background information on exactly what happened and kind of put some stuff into perspective here. And if you're not part of the Discord, go join the Patreon. You'll get it all there first. And then, of course, we'll share it much later on the podcast. So, little background on why they split. And what I was told is a very real mutual split. And that's what it sounds like. Staley felt that Derek Ansley, which, we'll get to in a second, is probably a year or two away from being a defensive coordinator, at least a candidate in the NFL. He's going to be getting interviews in the NFL as a DC very soon, they feel. So they wanted to get the jump on Ansley and promote them within so they wouldn't lose him. And Ronaldo Hill absolutely adores Vic Fangio. Hill and Fangio got really, really close when they worked together in Denver. Fangio contacted Hill while he was putting his staff together. Once Fangio was hired in Miami, he contacted Hill, wanted him to be part of his staff in Miami with the Dolphins, and Staley allowed him to go. He let him go because he knew how much Ronaldo, because they're actually, as you knew when they hired him, Ronaldo Hill and Staley are really close too. So Staley knows that Hill really, really wanted to work with Fangio again. And because he did, he let him go, and they wanted to promote Ansley. So moving forward on to the news that came out today. I know a lot of people are confused because the news, just like 4 or 5 days ago was Ansley was promoted and Tom Donatel was promoted and the staff's already intact. Why are they interviewing 2 new guys today? Well, the Chargers interviewed DeMarcus Covington and Doug Belk today, and they need to interview them because they have to interview external candidates in order to fulfill their role per the Rooney Rule. So they cannot just hire within, say, Ansley as new DC without hiring or without interviewing somebody outside of the staff first. So my guy said that, they're giving both Covington and Belk a shot to become defensive coordinator. They're going into these meetings not closed-minded. They don't have their minds made up on Ansley yet before the interviews. So just so you know, Ansley has not been officially hired. So even though you saw that Chargers planned on promoting, it was planned. They didn't say officially hired. Planned to promote Derek Ansley to defensive coordinator and Tom Donatel to secondary coach and passing game coordinator. Neither have been officially hired yet. And so they have to go through the motions here on the Rooney Rule. Though it's not so much the motions, they're actually going to give them a shot. And they want to keep Ansley, and they just might move him up and promote him to defensive coordinator if these two guys, Belk and Covington, don't absolutely blow the roof off in these interviews and make them have to hire one of those other guys.
Yeah. So I think, takeaways here. We know Brandon Staley is someone who values his relationships, and we know he and Ronaldo Hill were very close. And he, like you said, he knows how close Hill and Fangio are. So he didn't want to stand in Fangio's way or in Hill's way to go where he wanted to go. Probably an opportunity for Hill to get some more responsibility. It seems like a backwards move, but Hill was really only DC in name only, really kind of a figurehead of the defense, probably really involved in weekly planning, game planning and things like that, but not calling the plays, not really determining the identity of the defense. That's all Staley. So I'm sure he wanted to go somewhere where he could have a larger role and maybe ascend into more of a play calling defensive coordinator, or maybe have an opportunity to be a head coach at some point. So Staley didn't want to stand in his way. Got to respect that. And I think it also speaks to how they value Donatel and Ansley. Excuse me. They did a lot. The Chargers did a lot of really good work with the secondary in the second half of the season, particularly after JC Jackson went down early in the year. You saw a lot of growth from several players. You saw Jasir Taylor. We saw a lot of growth out of Michael Davis, who really struggled in the system in 2022 and grew in 2023. We saw some flashes of growth from Zont, who obviously had the huge playoff game. Yep. So
Bryce Callahan had his best year of his career.
Basically the entire second. We also saw growth out of not so much Adderley, but Alohi Gilman and some other guys in bit roles. So I think what we're really seeing here, what they're telling us is they really value the work that Ansley did with the secondary, and they feel like he's a guy who has the opportunity to, like Garrett said, ascend into bigger and better things. So they're looking to protect him. And it seems like they valued Ansley over Hill for that work that he did with the secondary. So, people have been saying for most of the offseason and really the last couple of years that Staley only hires from his personal network. He only hires his friends. He won't let his friends go. He won't fire his friends if they're a problem. Well, in this offseason alone, we've seen him get rid of 2 coordinators. And last offseason, we saw him get rid of the special teams coordinator. So he's obviously not afraid to make changes to the staff. So I think these are all positives. Hill gets an opportunity to potentially ascend into a larger role in Miami. Ansley gets to ascend into a larger role here. The Chargers seemingly kept the 2 guys that they valued the most. They didn't stand in the way of the other guy moving on. I think this is an everyone wins kind of a situation. And I don't really think there's a negative take out of it. I've seen people on Twitter saying things like, well, this just shows you that Staley's in hot water and his staff is in flux, and, he's just making crazy moves to save himself. I think that's reading into things an awful lot. I just think this is Staley rewarding somebody who did good work last year, not standing in the way of a longtime friend and colleague, getting a chance to ascend and grow into a bigger role that he probably would not have had here anyway.
Yeah.
So I think everybody gets what they need. Everybody gets what they want. And I think it's a win-win situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. Okay. So that's it. Again, if you're not part of the Patreon, go join us, and you can get that days before. So now let's move on to free agency, because that's what everybody's here for. We will start with unrestricted free agents. We'll talk about the the biggest names first, and we'll work our way down. We're going to cover every single one of them. And first off, we got to talk about Drew Tranquill. People are already talking about in the chat. This is probably the biggest name of the internal free agents for the Chargers. Let's go ahead and talk about linebacker Drew Tranquill.
So Tranquill, everybody knows, had his best year last year. He's a guy who's had some injury problems, finally played a full season, attained the green dot on his helmet because Staley trusts him to call plays on the defense. He's a guy who impacts the passing game in terms of pass rush and in terms of coverage. He impacts the run defense. He's probably the best tackler in the middle of that. Not probably. He is the best tackler in the middle of that defense. He ascended as a pass rusher, like I mentioned. He's a guy who really affects the defense at all three levels. I've seen people drawing comparisons to Tranquill and Kaiser White. Mm-hmm. And I hate to use this word, but I think those comparisons are a little bit lazy. Maybe we can say empty. I think we're kind of drawing a straight line to Staley doesn't value linebackers. He's not going to bring back Drew because he didn't bring back Kaiser, and Drew's going to get the same deal that Kaiser got because the linebacker market's kind of weird, and we're all going to be pissed because we're going to lose him for $4 million. So mm-hmm. I think what you're looking at with Tranquill really is, I think he's going to get a longer deal than Kaiser got, because unlike Kaiser, who we all loved, and he plays fast, he makes big plays, he's good in coverage. He's not a playmaker. He's not somebody who forces a lot of turnovers. He's not somebody who gets to the quarterback. He made tackles. He wasn't making a lot of tackles for loss. He wasn't hitting the quarterback. He wasn't sacking the quarterback. Really wasn't coming away with interceptions or showing up as, a standout in terms of zone and man coverage. He was solid, but not mm-hmm. great. I think Tranquill is much more of a playmaker. And I think his market will be a little bit more robust than Kaiser's was, but I don't think it's going to be this like market-breaking market where everybody's lining up to sign him and he's going to be able to basically name his price mm-hmm. and he's going to sign for $15-20 million and make bank. I mean, he's going to get paid. He's going to get a big raise. But so I think, if you're looking at Drew Tranquill, I think really in terms of comps, in terms of contracts, recent contracts that were signed, I think you're looking at Dre Greenlaw, Miles Jack, Josie Jewell, Jordan Hicks, and Frankie Louvu as the best comps for Drew Tranquill on his next contract. And I think what you're probably looking at is something in the neighborhood of a 3-year deal. He's probably going to make somewhere between $6 and $7 million a year. And you're probably looking at about $8 million guaranteed, probably about a $6 million signing bonus, and something in the neighborhood of a couple $1 million guaranteed in terms of his 2023 salary. So what I came up with is a 3-year deal, $19.5 million in total, an $8 million guarantee in total guarantees. And that is $6 million signing bonus, which is a $2 million prorated bonus each year of the deal, and $2 million in 2023 base salary. So he makes $4 million in year one, and then the deal kind of ramps up after that. And you'd be looking at an eject button like the Chargers normally have somewhere in the neighborhood after year 2, where really all you're looking at in terms of guaranteed money is the $2 million in prorated salary that's left over from the $6 million that the $6 million signing bonus. And I think that's what you're looking for. And I think that's something that if the Chargers make some of the moves that we're going to propose here in terms of cuts and restructures, I think they can give themselves enough cap space that they can bring Drew back. And I think because of his ability as a playmaker, because they took the green dot away from Derwin and gave it to Drew, I think this is somebody they're going to prioritize. I had my doubts about Kaiser. I wanted them to bring him back. But I think they almost have to bring Drew back. They don't have any linebackers other than Kenneth Murray really behind Drew Tranquill. I don't think they have the flexibility to let him go, and they have so many needs in free agency and in the draft that I don't think they can go into the free agency and the draft needing a starting linebacker as well. So I think this is somebody they prioritize, and I think if the numbers work out the way I think they will, my expectation is that they probably bring him back because he's such an important part of this defense, and he allows them to do so much at the second level.
Yeah, so we're pretty close on these numbers. Yeah, I mean, the Drew Tranquill and the green dot I think is really, really important. He was the Chargers' best linebacker in 2022, had his best season to date. They just without Drew Tranquill, without re-signing Drew Tranquill, they're with Kenneth Murray and a bunch of guys, and they just cannot go into free agency with no cap space. This linebacker market is a little weird. In terms of free agents, there isn't like a bunch of top end linebackers. This draft it seems so far, and I haven't really dove in, but from what I'm looking at, it's pretty top heavy in terms of linebackers. You almost have to sign Drew Tranquill. He is the absolute best linebacker on this team. You cannot go into 2022 with Kenneth Murray and all the uncertainty. They had him playing edge last year. They have no idea what to do with Kenneth Murray. Granted, this year he was linebacker, and there were, I guess, spurts of good play from him, but nothing where you're comfortable letting Drew Tranquill walk. He was banged up his first 3 years. It was his first full season as he was healthy, like Jamie mentioned. He showed he can get after the quarterback. He had 5 sacks this year, which was his best to date. And I had the same comp. It was Jordan Hicks. It's in terms of that price range. I also had Anthony Walker, who was with the Browns, the deal he signed with the Browns. I don't think you can go north of 3 years with the injury history. You can't go 4 or 5 years with Drew Tranquill. I think a 2 or 3 year deal is the right move. Having a 3-year deal with a ripcord after year 2 makes a ton of sense. I am in the $5.5 to $6 million range. You had 3-year, $19 million. Is that what you had?
I had about $6.5 million a year, give or take.
I have 3-year, $18 million. So we're right there in the neighborhood. So yeah, I mean, it's in that $6 million. I could see 5.5 to 6.5, somewhere in that range annually for Drew Tranquill. I would re-sign him. I think the Chargers absolutely do not have a choice here, and they have to re-sign him. They cannot let him hit the open market. I don't think there's going to be a bidding war, like Jamie mentioned. I don't think you start to see teams overpay for a guy like Drew Tranquill, but they have to re-sign him. I think with some right moves, which we'll talk about in a little bit, they'll have the cap space to do it. Signing him to a 3-year, $18 or $19 million deal makes a ton of sense. I would absolutely put that cushion or eject button, which, you'll hear us talk about a lot throughout this podcast, after year 2, just in case that injury history just keeps piling on and it can't put any healthy seasons together, just to protect yourself a little bit. But 3-year, $18-19 million for Drew Tranquill. I'm right there with you, Jamie. And the Chargers have to do it, and I would do it too.
Yeah, and I think, part of this is the linebacker market's really weird. It's super top heavy. It's a lot like the right tackle market, actually. It's super top heavy. And then there's a bunch of much smaller contracts in the middle, and then you have like all the rookies. There isn't really like a middle cut for the linebacker market. It's like you go from $9 million to like $5 million.
Yeah,
there's nothing really in between. No. So I think with a guy like Drew, a guy who's had his injury problems, a guy who, was kind of an uncertainty heading into this year, but seems like he really fits perfectly into this defense in terms of what they want to do with the middle linebacker position. And remember those words, by the way, because I think that fits perfectly in this defense and has unique value to this defense. I think it applies to a couple of guys on a couple of their current free agents. And you're going to hear that from me throughout this show. But I think for a guy like him, you can get him in that $5 to $7 million range. And you've kind of gotten him above that low to middle tier, and you're towards the bottom of the absolute middle tier. And I think that's a good spot for him. I don't, he doesn't have the eye-popping stats. He's not, a name guy. He's not somebody that the casual fan is going to know. I don't think he's going to have a huge market. So I think you can get him at a reasonable price. And like I said, I think he's kind of uniquely valuable to them. I think he probably really enjoys the fit that he has in Staley's defense. And I think this is one of 2 marriages, free agent marriages, that I think make a lot of sense for both sides, that will find a way to work out. for much the same reasons, because of how the player fits in the defense and the value he offers to the defense.
Yeah. Do you think the Chargers re-sign him?
I do. I think they get it done. I think they're going to clear a lot of space because they have to.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you look at that linebacker room and say, oh yeah, we're good with Bong and Neiman and Reeder. Like it just,
Reeder's a free agent, so not even Reeder. And Murray.
Yeah. And Murray, you said it's Murray and a bunch of dudes. It's just a bunch of dudes. Like that'd be a really tough loss. They'd almost have to take a linebacker in the first couple rounds of the draft, and then you're sacrificing other needs. And I just think it's you're putting yourself in a bad spot. It's not real good business to let somebody like Tranquill walk. And I think the fact that they gave him the green dot and they asked so much of him this year, and you saw his role as a blitzer expand quite a bit. They were using him in some Tampa 2 looks. His role in man and zone coverage expanded quite a bit. I think they're finding the value in him, and I think they're maximizing him in a way that some other defenses might not necessarily maximize him. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes sense for him to come back and for them to bring him back. So I think it gets done.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I absolutely think they cannot let him walk. And I know Staley might not value linebackers like what happened with Kaiser, but Drew is just a guy that fits perfectly in this defense, and you can't let him go. You just cannot have your second line of your defense be without Tranquill, and you're absolutely tying your hands going into the draft, because you can't dive into the free agent market at linebacker unless you get a bottom tier linebacker, and then you're going to have to absolutely draft a linebacker in the first 2 days, which means that you're neglecting other positions of need, and they're going to have a lot going into the draft. So yeah, this is a no-brainer. Have to absolutely re-sign Drew Tranquill. So next up here on our list is the right tackle, Trey Pipkins. Pipkins was solid this past season, played through injuries the entire year. The team was definitely worse when he wasn't on the field. He had a tough fit out and really fight through these injuries and play when he probably should have sat a lot. So I know the team values that. In terms of value, I think Pipkins is in the Morgan Moses range in terms of value with the deal that he signed with the Ravens. I know, and the deal was 3-year, $15 million. I know Moses is older, but he's been a rock at right tackle for a while. I think Pipkins' ceiling is absolutely $7 million. I think that's really rich. You're getting into the La'el Collins range, and Pipkins and Collins are on 2 different tiers. So I'm looking at the $5 to $6 million range for Trey Pipkins. I think a 3-year deal, 2 to 3 year deal is fair. I would absolutely add a ripcord after year 1, 2 if you have to. But Pipkins had his best season, but he's been absolutely bad throughout his career. I don't know that you really know what kind of right tackle you have in Trey Pipkins. So I think the Chargers would need an out in case the floor falls out on Pipkins. So I've gone back and forth on whether I would want to re-sign Trey Pipkins. I think a $5 to $6 million right tackle annually is pretty good value if he can improve like he did every year now with the Chargers. So I've got a 3-year, $5 to $17 million range kind of offer for Trey Pipkins. If he's looking for anything north of $7 million, I'm letting him walk. You cannot offer him anything more than $7 million in my mind annually. And then at that point, you start to wonder, if he wants too much, maybe Salyer flips out to right tackle and draft a guard, or hit up right tackle in the draft. But I'm looking at a 3-year, $15 to $17 million deal for Trey Pipkins.
I would prefer that.
Oh, you think it's more?
I don't think that's where it's going to go. I think
really.
So before I started digging into the numbers, I was in the same boat as you. I was looking at kind of Morgan Moses, Cam Irving, Trent Brown kind of territory. And I think the thing that kind of brought me off of that is not so much that I think Pipkin deserves more, but it's that all those guys were considerably older when they signed those deals. Pipkin is, I think, 26, 25, 26, something like that. Moses was 31 when he signed his deal. And he has been a rock, but he's on the downside of his career. Pipkins just had the best year of his career. Now, that's not saying much.
Yeah.
I think if I recall, I'm going off the top of my head here, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but I think he's only played in the 4 years that he's been in the league. I think he's only played more than 500 snaps twice. And this was the first year where he played more than 1,000 snaps. So like you said, I like the way you put it. I don't know that we know what we have in Trey Pipkins right now. He showed some flashes last year. He also struggled at times last year. Hard to know how much of that was injury versus people adjusting to him and finding ways to beat him. Mm-hmm. But I think the team is excited about him. And I think what you're going to find is his team, his agents are going to use that Chukwuma Okorafor contract, which was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $9 million, as where they want to be. And I think the Chargers are going to use probably Morgan Moses and Trent Brown and those guys as where they want to be. And I think you're going to settle somewhere in the $7 to $8 million range. So I have 3 years, $25 million with $12 million guaranteed. I think that first year cap hit will be super low, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like $4 or $5 million, and then it'll jump up pretty quickly after that. I think they will have to have that ripcord after year 2, if not year 1. This is where I think it's going to be. I don't like it. If this is where it is, I'm out.
Yeah.
100% out.
Where's your ceiling?
As my ceiling, I think you're in a good spot. I would say $5 to $6 million a year. Mm-hmm. And again, the right tackle market's weird. It's kind of like the linebacker market. Like, you have the top end guys all making like $14 to $20 million.
Yep.
And then there's a couple outliers. There's the guys like Brown, the guys like Morgan Moses, who are making like $5 or $6 million. You've got Lyle Collins in there, who's making $7 million. And then it's all the rest rookies. There's really no like clear second tier. All the second tier is an outlier. It's kind of an oddity in the market, just based on some strange things that happened last year. So I don't like it. If this is the number, I'm out, but this is where I think it goes. And my guess is I think they're going to be highly motivated to bring him back. So I think they're going to try to find a middle ground, and they're going to be somewhere in that $7 or $8 million range. And I think they bring him back once they clear some cap space. I think they're probably going to have enough money to bring back probably at the most 3 of these UFAs. And they're going to have to pick who's the most important. And I think they're going to prioritize Pipkins over everybody else because of all the line problems they've had in Telesco's tenure. They put so much time and energy into developing him. They feel like they finally got some return on their investment last year. And I think they're going to be in a hurry to bring him back. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the first free agent they bring back.
Yeah. 7 is my absolute ceiling. If I get the notification that's 3 years, $21 million, I'm like, okay. But man, anything over that, and it stings. I am out. Yeah. But and this is the great thing about this podcast too. Every year is we get to compare what we've got here on video and on audio on what we think the market is, and where we hit or we're low or we're high on guys.
And we're usually pretty close. And I think the crazy thing is we don't talk about this stuff beforehand.
No.
We might trade some text messages just about, oh man, look at that market. That market sucks. But we don't trade numbers at all going into these shows. And we're almost always like in lockstep, right on the same page with almost everybody. It's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, which is great because we've been doing this so long. It's we know each other, but also this is a perfect segue because we did text and said, "Oh my God, look at Nasir Adderley's market value. This is shit." So let's talk about it.
Yeah, so Adderley was a guy who I was pretty high on coming into this year. I felt like he took a couple of really big steps forward in 2021. And I thought he was primed to really take a leap in this defense with all the things they did with him last year. But it seemed like he was a little overloaded, and they might have asked too much of him. And he took the steps that he took forward in 21. I think he took back in 2022, and might have taken an extra 1 or 2 back in 2022. The tackling went back to where it was in year 1 and 2. The coverage was not. I mean, he had some flashes in coverage. He had that great pick. I think it was against the Titans. He had one taken off the board against the Chiefs early in the season. He flashed around the ball, but he's not around the ball nearly as often as he'd like. And when he is there, the ball skills aren't what they thought they were getting when they signed him. He is not really a playmaker. He's not particularly good as a last line of defense. He's not particularly useful, at least this year. He was not particularly useful as a run stopper. He just wasn't very good, period. Having said that, Rayshawn Jenkins got like $9 million when he was a free agent. There is always a stupid team out there. And you have a guy who runs like Adderley does, who has flashed the ball skills like he does. Somebody's probably going to look at him and think they can put him in a too high scheme and get a lot of picks and just kind of deal with the tackling. So in my opinion, like if it was me and I really felt the need to bring him back, which at this point I do not, which is kind of scary because the safety room is a mess right now. I would offer him a 1-year deal somewhere in the $4 or $5 million range and just see what happened. I think he's going to get a bigger deal than that. I don't think it's going to be like Rayshawn Jenkins big, but I think it's going to be way bigger than it should be. I have 3 years, $22 million, $12 million guaranteed, $6 million signing bonus, and then another $6 million in guaranteed salaries in 2020, $2 million in 2023, and $4 million in 2024 with a ripcord after 2024.
Yeah. So this market is hard. Nas had his most turnovers of his career this past season, 2 interceptions, forced fumble. But he was in and out of the lineup last season. They drafted JT Woods with their 3rd round selection. I'm with Jamie. My value for him, if I wanted to bring him back, which I do not as well, is 4 to 5, more like $4 million per year. It kind of tops out for me where Eric Murray got his deal with the Texans, which was a 2-year, $8 million deal. $4 million a year. If it was 2 years, I'd have a ripcord in that 2nd year, but I think he's getting more like $7 million per year, 3-year, $21 million. So I think we're pretty close there in terms of his value, where we think he's going to go. If you look at it, Nas was replaced by Alohi Gilman midseason. Gilman. They drafted JT Woods. They got to start making cuts somewhere. They can't re-sign all these guys. They have their contingency plan for Nas, which seemed like it was already happening last draft. So I'm okay if they're looking at adding maybe a veteran free safety for cheap or get one later in the draft. But you cannot go into the season with just JT Woods and Alohi Gilman. I am not re-signing Nas, nor do I think the Chargers are re-signing Adderley.
Yeah, I don't think they bring him back. I think he's going to get priced out of their market, and I think they're going to be more than happy to let him go test the market anyway. He's been benched or disciplined in some form or fashion by pretty much every coaching staff he's played for since he's been here. His play has been very spotty. Tackling has been an issue pretty much every year except for 2021. He's been probably one of the worst tacklers in the league. I don't think the value is there. I know they see, great playmaking potential. It just hasn't manifested itself on the field in the way that they thought it would. And I don't think you can keep paying for potential at this point. I know they don't like to give up on guys. They had him doing a lot in 2021 and in 2022. He's played some free safety, I think some strong safety. He's played some slot. He's been kind of all over the place. I've always thought he was much better as a slot corner than he was as a safety. I would have loved to see them make that move with him, but they didn't. I just don't see how you can bring him back. It's a little scary with the shape that the safety room is in. I think they're going to have to put a whole lot of faith in Gilman and Woods, which is terrifying. But I just don't. I don't see how it makes sense to bring him back.
Yeah,
he's going to get stupid money.
Yeah, I think more than he's worth for sure. There are some pretty good veterans free safeties on the market that you could probably get for cheap that I think might help out a very young and questionable free safety room, and that's probably the way in which I would go. But we'll talk about defensive free agents and offensive free agents on a later podcast.
Good lead.
How about that, huh? Next up here, the veteran, the linebacker Kyle Van Noy. Van Noy really stepped up last season. He helped push his defense into the playoffs. I mean, his play late was great. He signed for 1 year, $2.25 million last season. He's probably going to get another 1 year vet deal here at 31. I think they could get him around the same price again. Being an extra rusher and also being linebacker depth. I don't know if everybody remembers, but he was signed to be a inside linebacker and then rush on the edge at times. But because the edge group got decimated with injuries, he had to be a primary edge rusher most of last season. So when we were talking about how bad the linebacker group is in terms of depth, re-signing a guy like Kyle Van Noy would be helpful, and it wouldn't be too pricey. So somewhere in the 1 year, $2 to $2.5 million range, having a $750,000 to $1 million signing bonus, something in that neighborhood again makes a lot of sense.
This was a tough one for me. I like Van Noy. I thought he added a lot on and off the field. He clearly stepped up as a leader, helped kind of. I remember you saying during the season, he was a guy who was leading some players only meetings during the season. Obviously produced on the field. Once they moved him to edge, he really started his production ramped up, and he was extremely valuable off the edge for the Chargers. He's a guy I would love to bring back, and I'm sure the Chargers would love to bring him back. I think the age is a little problematic and might give them some pause, even though he's only going to probably need a 1 year deal. I have a 1 year, $3 million deal, and I have the whole $3 million guaranteed, just as a way to lure him in. I have a feeling he's going to go. I think they're going to prioritize interior pressure. Little segue there.
Okay.
Over the edge pressure, and they're probably going to try to get younger on the edge in the draft. So as much as I want to bring him back, I ultimately wound up saying that I think he's going to wind up signing somewhere else. And I think that's going to be a pretty big loss. But I think they need to get younger. I think they need to start planning for the future on the edge. And I think with questions about now I'm blanking on his name.
Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Chris Rumph.
There we go. Chris Rumph. He's so important I forgot his name.
Yep.
With questions surrounding Chris Rumph, his ability to set the edge, his consistency as an edge rusher, with some of the issues that Joey's had in terms of injuries, in terms of some of the public statements he's been making, some of the issues he's had off the field and with officials, and Mac getting older and his contract only having a couple years left on it. I think getting younger and getting more explosive on the edge is going to be really important. And that's why I think they'll probably move in favor of letting Van Noy walk and trying to find somebody in the first 2 to 3 rounds of the draft who can step in and make plays right away. I
am completely with you, just in a different mind frame, in that they will have Bosa and Mac. They will Rumph is, he is what he is at this point, but drafting an edge player and then bringing Kyle Van Noy in as the 4th edge rusher at times and some inside linebacker depth is my thinking that they value in him and why they would bring him back.
I can go for that.
That's where we differ, but pretty close. 2.25 million to 2.5 million to 3. I mean, that we're pretty close there too, but it's definitely going to be a 1 year deal. You can't do anything more than that.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of the age. All right. So let's move on, Jamie, to another guy they signed in the offseason to a 1 year deal. And that's the slot corner, Bryce Callahan.
Yeah, Callahan had a great season for them. I mean, he was a huge part of this defense, both in terms of run support and in terms of coverage. Showed some ball skills, was very, very good. He's a guy who's always been one of the best slot corners in the game. He just had a hard time staying on the field, and he basically played a full season last year and really showed out for them in a big way. He's another guy. He's like Van Noy to me. He's a guy who I think they really should bring back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure they will. I think they have some guys that they like in the slot, guys like a Jasir Taylor, to name one, who they want to see more of in the slot. I think with the way Callahan played, he's probably going to get a pretty hefty raise. Not huge, but big enough to possibly make him a little bit prohibitive for the team. Just looking at recent contracts, I had the following guys as comps for him. I had Mike Hilton, Anthony Brown, Patrick Peterson, Anthony Averett, and Brandon Faison as comps in terms of salary for Callahan. I think Callahan, he'd probably wind up being a little bit closer to like the Mike Hilton, Anthony Brown, Patrick Peterson level. And I think what you're looking at with him is probably a 2-year deal. I think he probably played himself into a nice 2-year deal, maybe with a little ripcord after year one. $9 million with $3 million guaranteed, and a $1.5 million signing bonus. So basically half the contract is guaranteed.
And annual is 4.5.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. This is I'm with you here because he's a guy. If Chargers had a bunch of money, which they do not, so we're in fantasy land right now, but they should re-sign Bryce Callahan. I mean, he was one of the best, arguably one of the best offseason signings last year. He had a career year under Staley. He's 31 years old, just like Van Noy, but last year he signed for $1.2 million. But also, when you look at that number, that was late in free agency, so you can't quite use that as a barometer. And he deserves a pay bump. So either way, he's getting more money than that. He was a solid slot corner, but I was going to mention it too. They want to get more snaps to Jasir Taylor. You saw it. Taylor was the starter early on in games late in the year. They really, really like him. They want to give him more reps. And I think they will probably let Callahan walk and just replace him with Taylor and move somebody else inside with J.C. Jackson, Michael Davis, and also work on some of the guys they drafted, because they drafted a lot of DBs. I know they want to get a rotation in, and with a 31-year-old slot corner, they got another corner, Jasir Taylor, who's young, promising. I think they end up going that way. I've got him getting a pay bump as well, but I am a million under you. I've got $3.5 million as his asking price, either a 1 or 2 year deal. It's enough raise that I think he deserves. He was one of the best slot corners in the NFL last year, to be honest with you. I think he was top 10. I just loved his play last year. And Jamie mentioned it, but a very underrated run defender. And I think if the Chargers let him go, it's going to hurt a little bit, especially early on in the season. So I think he deserves it. I went back on the fourth on this. I mean, $3.5 million for a pretty dominant slot corner is nice. But I just don't think the Chargers can afford it. And this is a tough cut for me. I don't think the Chargers re-sign Callahan.
I agree. I don't think they bring him back. I think they have other needs that they're going to prioritize.
Yeah. And that need is this guy here, and it is Morgan Fox for me. He was an absolute awesome addition last offseason. He had the most starts of his career. He had 12. Most sacks of his career was 6.5. This is really the best fit for not only the Chargers, but for Morgan Fox. It'd benefit him to re-sign with the Chargers, and the team needs more solid depth on the interior, especially with how your edge rush wasn't quite getting there last year. I know Bosa was injured, but they just couldn't get pressure off the edge. One guy who got pressure was Morgan Fox, and it was that interior pressure, and he really helped this defense. He was the guy in terms of the D-line. He really, really pitched in and did more than everybody had expected of him. He signed for $1.1 million last year, but like Callahan, he signed late in the offseason too. So he kind of got lowballed in his deal a little bit, but I think he is more in the 2-year, $3.5 million. He's more like $4 million, about $2 million per year, getting a little bit, doubling his input from last year. of the million, giving him 2 per year, maybe 3. I'm looking at a 2-year, 4 to 6 million with an out after the first year with the ripcord. I just want to give Fox more incentive to be with the Chargers. I know that he signed a 1-year deal and has signed these little 1-year deals. He deserves some stability. He's very good in this defense. He is the perfect fit for Staley's defense. I'm giving him 2 years, an extra year, and I think the Chargers re-sign him. I've got a 2-year, I split the difference, $5 million deal.
We're in the same ballpark in terms of the length of the contract, but I'm in a different ballpark in terms of the value.
All right.
So Fox was a difficult guy to price out on the market. And the reason he's a difficult guy to price out on the market is because he's a 260-pound defensive tackle. He's not terrible against the run, but he isn't a dominant run stuffer. He is a productive interior pass rusher, but he's not an elite interior pass rusher. And he also, at his size, is not really bendy or explosive enough to play on the edge. So he kind of needs to fit in a very specific scheme in a very specific role. And like we talked about, I mentioned it earlier with Drew Tranquill, I feel like the Chargers and this scheme that Staley runs are perfect for him. If you look at his career, he was basically a 1 sack a year guy before Staley came in 2020 and called the defense for the Rams, at which point he went from a 1 sack a year guy to a 5 or 6 sack a year guy. He signs a big, I think 2 or 3 year deal with the Panthers immediately after that, plays 1 year, goes back down to being a 1 sack guy. Now he's back with the Chargers and he's back producing again. So I think this is just a perfect marriage. It's like a match made in heaven. He fits perfectly into what Staley wants to do with him on the defensive line. Staley knows exactly how to use him. There is a very unique value and a very unique fit. I don't think he's going to get top money because he's not really a true defensive tackle. And you also can't price him out as an edge because he's not really explosive enough as an edge. He needs to be schemed in a lot of ways into his sack opportunity. So what I have is a 2-year, $12 million deal for Fox. With $7.5 million guaranteed. So $6 million a year. I think you get an out after year 1. But I think this is a deal that makes a lot of sense for the Chargers. I think you can structure it in such a way that most of the heavy cap hit is in year 2. So you're not really taking on a huge chunk of salary in year 1. And I just feel like this is something they have to do, much like Tranquill. He's such an important, specific, uniquely valuable piece to this defense that I think it has to happen. So that's where I am. I'm at about $6 million a year. I could see it being anywhere between 4 and 6, but I think it's 5.5, 6.5 sacks. With the way they use him, I think he could be really productive, and I think he's a guy who's probably going to kind of knows where his bread is buttered, so to speak, and is going to be looking to make it easier to come back.
Okay. All right. Well, so I've got 3 million annually. You got 6. So this is the furthest we've been so far. And it is odd because he's just not quite an edge, not quite an interior defensive lineman. It's a weird kind of fit and hard number to really nail down. But let's move on to the next guy here. And it is the wide receiver, DeAndre Carter.
Carter's a guy who I think was a nice fit this year, but I think the Chargers need to revamp their wide receiver room. I think they could even get better at kick returner. Carter was very good as a punt returner. He made some big plays as a slot receiver, and even as an outside receiver was not very good as a kick returner, still had some fumbling issues. He was a nice piece. I know he was looking for a 2-year deal last year. I think he'll go shopping for a bigger contract this year. After he basically doubled his career production in one season this year. I have a 1-year, $2.25 million deal for Carter. Maybe somebody gets desperate for him and it's 2 years, $4 to $5 million, somewhere in that range. Not a lot of money, not a whole lot of guarantees, not too cost prohibitive, but I just think, he filled his role. He did his job. I think this is somebody that they need to move on from, so that they have the roster space to revamp the wide receiver room.
Yeah. Yeah, I went back and forth on this, but not really, not giving it as much thought as the other guys that we've talked about. But Carter's been another guy who got more play because of the injuries. Put up his best numbers of his career. Brought in his returner. He was 12th in the NFL in average yards per return. He was 5th in the league in total return yards. He flashed at times, had his fumbling issues, and as a receiver, he was good enough as a wide receiver 4. So I think they absolutely need to get better at receiver and returner over DeAndre Carter. He signed for just over $1 million, and I had $2 million on a deal. But if they were to sign him on a 1-year, $2 million deal as some wide receiver depth and to compete as a returner, I'm okay with that. If they let him go, I'm not heartbroken. I'm really wishy-washy on this. I don't really care about this too much. But either way, they have to draft a wide receiver to be a speed option.
2.
But yeah,
they need
okay.
2 receivers.
Yeah, that's true too. But as a 1-year option for $2 million, I mean, it's a low risk. Could be some depth. I could be okay with that. Pushed them down the depth chart as maybe a wide receiver 5. But they got to get better, no doubt about it. They got to draft a wide receiver, and he cannot be the wide receiver 3 on the field anymore. But I'm you had, I think, 3 or 4 million. You think he's going to get on the market? I'm comfortable around 2.
I had two a year.
2 a year.
Yeah, two and a half, somewhere in that range.
Oh, so we're exactly on. Yeah. So, I'm okay with it, but you can absolutely drop Carter. I don't have any real tie to him at all. So, but, and I don't know. I don't think the Chargers sign him. I think they're going in a different direction this offseason. Okay. Next up here, and it's probably going to go a little bit faster because we're going to go into some of these lower names here on this list. Next up is linebacker Troy Reeder. He was mostly a depth guy, didn't really play a lot, signed for just over $1 million. I think they could do better in terms of depth and through the draft. I know that the wide receiver room and the linebacker room are lacking, but it'd be a low cost to re-sign Reeder. They need depth, but I wouldn't re-sign Reeder. I think you could pick up a day 3 linebacker with some upside as depth if it were me. So I would pass on Reeder. I think the Chargers may think about bringing him back on a 1-year deal, something around what he signed, somewhere in the $1 million range. But I would not bring him back.
Yeah, I think you're probably looking at about $1.5 million for him on a 1-year deal. I tend to agree. I think because he's familiar with Staley and because he's familiar with the system, and I guess he has value on special teams, even though I don't think he had very many. I don't think he had that many tackles, but he's supposed to have value on special teams. I think they probably bring him back because it's so low cost and it's just 1 year and there's really no risk. And they're going to need. Hopefully, they bring him back with minimal guarantees. They add linebackers at least one linebacker in the draft. They retain Tranquill, and he's forced to compete for a role in camp.
Yep.
But yeah, I think they probably bring him back just because he's that veteran, special teams value, knows the system. He flashed when he was on the field a little bit last year. So I think he's back. I think he probably comes back.
Yeah, I do too. Would you if you were GM?
No.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next up, Chase Daniel.
I think Daniel's going to retire. So I don't think anybody's going to sign him. I think he's going to go the media route. He's already been on NFL Network a few times. So I didn't even bother coming up with a contract for him. He's probably retired. He's gone. That's it.
Yeah. Get rid of him. The end. I mean, he just looked absolutely washed with every snap he got throughout the year. He was bad. The vet presence was great. The friendship was great. Time is up for Daniel. Next up is Easton Stick. I think they've kept Stick 2 years too long. He's a borderline QB3 in this league. I would not bring him back. This experiment is over for me. He got his shot. Time to find another backup quarterback. Herbert is the future. I don't care drafting a day 3 quarterback or a vet for low cost. Doesn't matter. This experiment is over for me. I say no, and I think they will move on from him.
I don't think they'll move on.
No? You think they'll keep him?
I think they'll keep him, and I think he'll probably sign a 1-year deal in the $1 million to $1.5 million range. I think they see him as the long-term QB2, and I think they bring him back.
How? All right. But would you?
He's Herbert's service animal, basically.
Okay. And would you bring him back? Would you bring back Stick?
No.
Yeah, didn't think so. All right. Next up, the backup center Will Clapp.
Bye. I didn't even bother coming up with a salary for him. I think you're probably looking at the vet minimum. I would not mess around with bringing him back. I thought he was not very good when he was on the field last year. They had all kinds of problems with protections when he was on the field. I think you're better off drafting a center late day 2, maybe mid day 3, somewhere in that range, and developing somebody behind him, behind Lindsley. I don't think there's any value to bringing Clapp back.
Yeah. I'm really looking at that guard, center, versatile interior lineman in late day 2, early day 3. They absolutely need a contingency plan for Corey Lindsley for when he's done, and that which could be very soon. Was injured last year, getting up there in age, contracts running out. You need that developmental center very soon. And I know there's been rumors of Zion maybe switching over there at some point in his career, but right now you need a guy to sit behind Lindsley for a year and get some reps in and develop a guy behind him. Will Clapp was bad. I get he's a veteran. He would definitely get the vet minimum for wherever he signs. You don't need him. Draft a center.
I agree.
All right. Next up, the punter, J.K. Scott. Here we go. Special teams. He had his moments last year. Kind of seemed to be hit or miss towards the end of the year. Playoffs struggled a little bit in that Jaguars game, but his hang time was so crazy good. He only surrendered 66 total return yards. I looked it up. I couldn't believe it. So they got to bring him back. Their special teams have plagued them like forever, and they're finally good. And you just bring him back. He signed for just under $1 million. They could get that done. Maybe give it a little bit over $1 million. I don't care about punter contracts, but I know that they got to keep J.K. Scott, and I think they will.
Yeah, I agree. I think you give him maybe a 2-year deal with a ripcord after year 1. I have 2 years, $3 million, probably very minimal guarantees, low salary, low guarantee year 1, make him earn the second year. But I don't think they can afford to let him walk. He was way more good than bad last year. I know he had his struggles in the playoffs, but he was really good the other 17 games.
Oh my God. So 66 total yards through 17 games.
Yeah. That's crazy. Less than 4 yards a game?
Do the math. I'm not good at it.
Crazy.
So, it's wild.
So yeah, I think they bring him back. I think they kind of have to. You want to keep that intact. So easy one.
Yep. All right. Next up, the vet, defensive tackle Christian Covington.
This is a guy, I think he's kind of like, the current day Damian Square, where they may not necessarily bring him back right away, but they seem to see something in him that they like. And they might let him sit for a while, maybe stash him on the practice squad like they did last year at the very end of camp, something along those lines. I would let him go. I don't think you really need to bring him back. I think, with the addition, if they keep Fox, with the addition of Fox and Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson and the way Tito played when he was healthy, I just don't think you need him. And I'm not sure necessarily what he adds. I think he'd be pretty easily replaced either with a late round pick in the draft or a bottom, lower tier free agent. But I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of hangs around and they bring him back as camp gets near, for very little money, maybe maybe to stash him on the practice squad or something.
Yeah, I could see him bringing him back. They seem to like him. They want him as part of this franchise. He signed for over $1 million. Part of me thinks you could use some of that money for some of the low end deals, like we mentioned a little bit earlier. But yeah, I mean, I think they let him walk. I think this is one of those decisions they're just going to have to make, and they're just going to have to cut Christian Covington. Maybe think about drafting another defensive tackle, getting another vet or something. But my heart tells me they're going to let Covington go. I would let Covington go, and I think the team will too.
Yeah, I would too. I don't think you need to bring him back. Unless you just really, really need a depth guy who's going to get hurt at some point.
Yeah. You just can't stay healthy. So I think they don't bring him back. Next up, we got 2 more before the restricted free agents. And we can fire these last 2 off. Tight end Richard Rodgers, no real upside here. Tight end room sucks. And even with the weak tight end room, I wouldn't bring him back.
No, I wouldn't bring him back either. He was there because they were really hurting at tight end. I think they're going to add at least 1 tight end in the draft this year. So no real need to bring him back.
No. And then defensive lineman Tyler Davison, who signed in the middle of the season because the injuries to the D-line, really a non-factor in 6 games he played in. He can go. Sam?
Yeah, I don't think there's a rush to bring him back either.
All right. So already an hour in, and we're just hitting restricted free agents. How about this, Jamie? Okay. So you could give these guys a tender, these restricted free agents. The lowest is the right of first refusal tender, which is worth $2.4 million. Are you tagging any of these?
Actually, that went up. It's 2.6.
Oh, is it?
I saw. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's call it 2.6. 2.6 million. Here are your guys. Are you tagging any of these guys? Donald Parham, Jalen Guyton, Braden Fehoko, Storm Norton, Joe Gaziano, or Derek Tezuka?
Well, wait. Fehoko is an ERFA.
He is? No, I think he's restricted.
No, I don't think he's I don't think he's accrued enough seasons.
Okay.
He's only
all right.
You need to be on the roster for at least 6 games in 3 consecutive years. And he's only been on the roster for 2 years.
Okay. Well, okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I don't know about that, but okay. Anyway, are you giving any of the guys, not including Fehoko, a tender?
I would not. I think they probably will give at least 2 of them the right of first refusal tender. I could see them tendering Guyton as a means just for protecting him to see if anybody else has interest in him. I think all these guys are really guys that you can not tender and probably get back for less than the $2.6 million tender.
Mm-hmm.
So Storm Norton for sure. I would not pay him $2.6 million. Parham, I know people love him. I still think we don't really know what we have in him. Can't stay healthy, kind of comes and goes in terms of production, really hasn't been very consistent as a tight end too. Although a good blocker and was pretty big in the running game late in the year when he came back. And Guyton, same thing. I doubt he's going to have such too huge of a market because he hasn't really been that productive. He was hurt last year. I think you can let all those guys walk. And if you must have them back, I think you can bring them back for less than the tender.
So I just looked it up. According to the Chargers website, Fehoko is a restricted free agent, and he has played 3 seasons.
Oh, okay. Well, then no, I would not give him. I would not give him the tender.
Yeah, me neither. It doesn't. So I am not tendering any of these guys. I wouldn't mind re-signing Parham to a 1-year deal if it's like under $1 million, around $1 million, somewhere hovering there. With the injury history, you can't give him anything more than 1. And because the tight end room is so bad, I think you have to think about bringing him back. Jalen Guyton, I know there is a subsection of Chargers fan base that likes Guyton and thinks he can stretch the field. I think they're going to go through some tough decisions this offseason. I think they let him walk. I think they're drafting a wide receiver, and at that point, he's wide receiver 5, 6 after that. So,
and I think the thing is, we said earlier we think they need to sign 2 draft 2 wide receivers in this draft. I think that is absolutely true. And I think if you wait till day 3 to get one of them, you're probably going to wind up getting one, maybe 2 wide receivers for what you'd pay Guyton on the tender, and probably less.
Yeah.
So I just don't see the value in paying him $2.6 million. I know the deep game struggled without him this year. There were a whole lot of things that went into that. Play calling, pass protection, having one of the slowest wide receiver rooms in the league. All these things contributed to the deep game really struggling this year. I think Guyton, because of how slow the rest of the room is, Guyton looks like a much bigger playmaker than he really is. He's basically just straight line speed. They need to find guys who aren't just fast, but who are explosive and who have some twitch, can make people miss. And that's really not Guyton. He's just a straight line speed. You know, Staley said it himself last offseason. We need somebody who is more than just, oh, we know he's taking the top off the defense when he comes on the field. And that's really all Guyton is. You know, he'll beat somebody every once in a while, but he's not consistent. So I don't think he's worth that $2.6 million. And I think you can replace him and Carter with 2 guys in the middle or late rounds of the draft and probably save some money while you're at it.
Yeah. I don't think anybody on this restricted free agent list is worth half of the $2.6 million. I don't think they're bringing back Guyton. I think they're replacing him in the draft. I am for bringing back Donald Parham. I think they might, but it's only on a 1-year deal. Braden Fehoko.
I think Parham comes back. I agree with that.
I do too. Okay. Braden Fehoko, pretty good at the end of the year if he's a restricted free agent. I'm re-signing him for $1 million, somewhere in the $1 million range. Same with Parham, 1-year deal. And then, quite honestly, I'm going to take away his Twitter login because he's an absolute nuisance.
Nonsense.
tweeting nonsense on my timeline. So I'll bring him back as long as he promises not to tweet, and I don't have to see any of his thoughts and stuff because they're not fun. But would you bring back Fehoko, and what's your kind of price range for him?
I mean, I think he was pretty good towards the end of the year. Like you said, he made some nice plays in the run game. Really doesn't offer much in terms of pass rush. Hasn't been on the field that much, so I doubt he'll have a huge market. I think he's a guy that you can probably bring back for less than that $2.6 million if indeed he is a restricted free agent. I'd say somewhere in the like $1 to $1.5 million range on a 1-year deal. Make him earn a bigger contract. Maybe you get, maybe you reward him for playing well at the end of the year and sign him for 2 years and spread some of that out.
Give yourself a ripcord after year 1 for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But in terms of the tender, I don't think you really need it, and I don't think it makes a lot of sense financially.
So then next up, Storm Norton, who fell out of favor with the Chargers, obviously went from starting right tackle going into camp to inactive over Foster Sorrell. So I think he's absolutely gone.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard Staley say they don't give up on people in this organization, so nothing would surprise me at this point. But I mean, they literally went out of their way not to put Storm Norton on the field. And I know there's some belief that last year was his redshirt season, and maybe they're trying to develop him and they think they see some traits in him that they can develop. I guess it's possible. There's no way you tender him, in my opinion. Absolutely no way. I think you let him test the market, let him sit for a while. Maybe you bring him back on a small deal to compete for a spot in camp, but I don't think there's really any rush or desperation to bring him back. He's awful. And if they re-sign Pipkins, you would have
Jamari Salyer.
You'd have Salyer, who you can move out to right tackle as a swing tackle kind of thing. So I don't think it's necessary.
No.
And I think they should be looking for a long-term swing tackle later in the draft this year anyway.
All right. So what do you think about Joe Gaziano?
I like Gaziano. I would love to see them bring him back. I think he's another guy who you can decline the tender and let him hit the market and probably have a pretty good shot at bringing him back, considering the amount of time that he spent on the practice squad the last couple of years. I don't think he'd have an overwhelming market, and I think you could probably bring him back for probably less than half of that first right of first refusal tender.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you love the positional flexibility. Bringing him back for something low, I wouldn't mind doing. Next up, Derek Tezuka, who was signed because the Chargers needed edge depth. I don't want to see Taziki on a football field anymore. I say absolutely not, and I don't think they'll bring him back.
No, they won't, and they shouldn't.
All right, so exclusive rights free agents. So for this category, the Chargers could offer the player a one-year contract at the league minimum. The player cannot negotiate with other teams, and so, like we say every year, it's basically like the players are free. It's the absolute minimum. You can stash them. It's really easy decision to make. Let's just rip through these. Cameron Dicker.
He's back because of a cut I think they're going to make. And because he is like a quarter of the cost of the person they're going to get rid of. So yeah, I think he's back. And like we said, these are procedural moves. These moves are like automatic. Teams very rarely let a restricted free agent move or an exclusive rights free agent walk away. They don't give up control on these guys.
Next up, Michael Bandy. That's easy. Keep him.
Sure, why not?
And a wide receiver. At most, he can compete in camp as a one last wideout. Foster Sorrell, who we mentioned earlier.
He'll be back. They obviously like him. He was on the field more than he should have been this year.
Yep, he was the backup right tackle. Come on, Hall. They keep stashing Hall.
Sure, special teams value. I think he comes back.
Yep, and then Forrest Merrill.
Merrill.
Back and forth on this.
I mean,
it doesn't hurt.
I think they bring him back.
Yeah,
just because they can, and there's no risk.
Yeah, they could absolutely do better. They could find a UDFA nose tackle, but it's the league minimum. Just let them come back and compete in camp. All right, so Jamie, an hour, 12 minutes later, we hit the restructures, cuts, and everything else in between. You ready to fire this off here?
I am.
All right. I'm going to share the screen, and for anybody who's into where did it go? Hold on one second. I will
get so normally we do while Derek's looking for my spreadsheet. Garrett, I'm sorry. Garrett's looking for my spreadsheet. Normally we do this show without visual aids. It's normally just the podcast, and we're talking to you guys. You can't see us, but now that we're doing the live feed, we wanted some visual aids for the cuts and restructures. So I put together a spreadsheet, much like the one that I put together last year, that breaks down all the cap numbers and breaks down all of the cuts and restructures.
Spreadsheet.
Can you make that bigger?
I'm sure I can. How do I do that? Let's see here. We'll figure this out. We're going live. What if I think I'm just going to have to make the font bigger. I don't know that I can. Okay. We'll start there. Okay. Here we go. Expected salary.
So let me see here. Okay. So the Chargers' current cap space, which they have no cap space, they're well over the cap. It varies depending on the sources that you go to. So we'll start with breaking down the cap, and then we'll talk about some of the cuts and restructures. So right now, the expected salary cap for this year is $224,800,000. The Chargers have about $2.6 million left over from 2022 that they're going to roll over into this year. 600 of that is expected to be lost to some adjustments. That 600,000 number isn't in here because I wanted to simplify things. But so we're looking at an adjusted cap figure once you include the rollovers and the adjustments of $226,820,966. Excuse me. The Chargers currently have $248,231,642 in existing liabilities for the 2023 season. which means they are just under $21.5 million over the cap. They also need to clear about $3 million for draft liabilities, for spending on draft picks. So that puts them at just under $24.5 million over the cap. So they go into the offseason, unlike last year where they had a ton of space and they were able to make some moves to create more space. This year, they're in a position where they have to clear a bunch of space just to get cap compliant before you even start talking about free agents and re-signing their guys.
Mm-hmm.
So if we scroll down, so if you can go to the cuts tab, Garrett, I would appreciate it.
The cut.
It's see right down here at the bottom, cuts.
Yep.
There you go. Can you make that a little bigger?
Oh boy, Jamie. Come on. Everybody's going to complain about it in the chat, but it's okay. All right.
Okay. So there are two really easy cuts the Chargers can make this offseason that will save them just under $9 million. The first one is Matt Filer. This is someone who had two pretty good years for or actually one really good year for the Chargers and dropped off big time last season. He started to get a little bit better towards the end of the year, but still was mostly not very good last year. If the Chargers cut him, they would absorb $2 million in dead cap, but they would have a savings of $6.5 million, which is roughly a quarter of what they have to clear in order to get cap compliant. So this is kind of a no-brainer. I think my expectation is they will cut Matt Filer. Generally speaking, when the Chargers reach these, ripcords in contracts with players, and there's any question about the player's productivity, they almost always pull the trigger. In fact, I think they pretty much always do. So I'd be surprised if Filer survives the cap. I'd be surprised if Filer is not a cap casualty.
Mm-hmm.
So there they've cleared $6.5 million in cap savings. The next person that I think they will cut is the kicker, Dustin Hopkins. I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about Cameron Dicker as an ERFA. So there are two ways you can cut somebody. You can cut them pre-June 1, in which case any signing bonus they have left on their deal counts against the cap year in which you cut them. The other way you can cut them is post-June 1, which you don't technically have to cut them after June 1st. You can designate them as a post-June 1 cut. And what that does is it spreads out the dead cap. So in this case, Hopkins has $800,000 in signing bonus money left over in each of the next 2 years. So if they make Hopkins a post-June 1 cut, they would eat $800,000 in dead cap. They would wind up saving themselves just under $2.3 million towards the cap. So we've made two moves. And if you go back to the cap sheet, we have saved just under $8.8 million. So we've gone from $24.5 million in cap space to just under $16 million, 15.7, call it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to bring us to the restructures. So there are several restructures that the Chargers have an opportunity to make here. Some of them are a little bit more cap prohibitive than others, but I think these are all things that the Chargers really need to at least consider, if not do. So the first one is Joey Bosa. Bosa has a $38 million cap number this year, $31 million cap number this year. That is broken up into $24 million in fully guaranteed base salary, which is due to him on March 17th of this year, assuming they don't make any changes to the contract, and $7 million in signing bonus. My recommendation here is to take $21 million in guaranteed base salary and convert that into signing bonus. What that does is it takes that $21 million and it spreads it out over the last 3 years of his deal, 2023, 2024, and 2025. So what that does is it takes the signing bonus for the next 2 years and increases it from $7 million to $14 million. And it creates an additional $7 million in signing bonus in 2025. So because this money is already guaranteed, Joey's going to make it whether they restructure him or not. It really doesn't impact him. He's getting this money regardless, but he is giving the team a lift. So this is something that I really think they need to do, especially after his injuries over the last few years and some of the issues he's had with officials and other things. I think there has to be at least a little bit of concern over Joey. So I think approaching him about a restructure is wise for the Chargers. So by converting $21 million into signing bonus and spreading it out over the next 3 years, the Chargers create $14 million in cap space for 2023. So now we've almost already eliminated what was left of that $15.6 million negative cap. It doesn't impact Joey. The major negative of doing something like this, and you have to be careful about how much you're spreading out. I was really aggressive here for obvious reasons, but by doing this, you're basically making Joey untradeable and uncuttable for cap purposes in 2023 and 2024. So you could cut him and basically save $25.3 million prior to the 2025 season. You'd have to eat $7 million in signing bonus, but I think the team would be willing to eat $7 million in order to save 25 and change. So it still makes sense. You just take that eject button out from after this year to after next year. So you give him an extra year of security and you create some cap space for yourself. So this is something I think they should and probably will do on some level. Will they convert all 21 million? Maybe, maybe not. But I do think we'll see a restructure from Joey. He's the one big contract they really haven't touched, and I think it's time to touch it.
Yep.
The next restructure is Mike Williams. So Mike, this year he is due $19 million. $12 million of that is fully guaranteed. Again, due on March 17th this year, assuming they don't make any changes to his contract. The out in Mike's contract is after this year. My suggestion here is to take $10 million in base salary and convert it to signing bonus. So basically what that does is it takes the $7 million in signing bonus he's owed, or that's being prorated, I should say, because he's already been paid the signing bonus, but the prorated signing bonus goes from $7 million each of the next 2 years to $12 million each of the next 2 years. You could still cut him after 2023. But did I say that right? I'm sorry. No, you
eat 12 to save 20.
That would be before the 2024 season. Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So you could still have the out on his contract after this year. And the numbers still make sense to where you're saving enough that you could have, it would make sense to eat 12 to save 20. So I think that makes sense. And with the uncertainty surrounding Keenan right now, is he going to be extended? Is he going to be restructured? Could he be cut? They may need to extend Mike at some point again, depending on what happens with Keenan. But right now I have them restructuring him. So I think this makes sense for them. We'll see if they do it. Now this one, JC, this is one that I went back and forth on whether or not I wanted to include, mainly because I think it's a little sticky to try to restructure somebody while they're hurt, and JC may not play at all this year. And I think as you'll see, if you restructure him the way I'm suggesting, you lose your out after 2024. You would not be able to cut him until after the 2025 season. So things do get a little dicey, but JC this year is due $12 million in fully guaranteed salary and $5 million in signing bonus. My suggestion is to take $10 million of that base salary and convert it into a signing bonus, spreading it out over the next 4 years at $2.5 million a year. So as you can see, what that does is it takes his signing bonus each of the next 4 years from $5 million to $7.5 million. But it reduces his cap hit from $17 million to $9.5 million in 2023. So you are saving $7.5 million this year in cap space by making a move like this. Like I said, if you do this, it makes it more difficult to cut him. You basically have to wait until after the 2025 season to cut him. but they put themselves in this position, so they have to consider some of these things. This one's probably the least likely of the ones I've suggested, but it is an option for sure.
All right, next up.
Corey Linsley. This is probably the easiest
of
all the suggestions that I have here. So Linsley is due $13.1 million this year. He has no guaranteed salary left on his deal, and his signing bonus is relatively minimal over the next 2 years. Without touching his contract, Linsley would have sorry, I just blanked there for a second. If they don't touch his contract this year, they would have an out heading in after this coming season to get out of his contract. And they would still have that even if they restructure it. So what I'm suggesting here is taking $6 million of Linsley's base salary for 2023 and converting it into a signing bonus. What that does is it adds $2 million of signing bonus to each of the next 3 years on his contract. So his salary would go from, his signing bonus would go from 2.6 to $4.6 million each of the next 2 years. You would reduce his cap hit by $4 million this year and save the team quite a bit of money. And you would still be able to pull the trigger on a ripcord next year. You'd eat $4.6 million to save $11.5 million. So that's still a pretty palatable trade-off in terms of savings if they decide to cut him for some reason after the 2023 season.
Last one.
And this is the last one. And Keenan is a guy. This is one that's a little tricky because there are a couple different ways they could go with him. They could either restructure him, or I could see Keenan and Michael Davis, who I didn't include in this exercise, getting extended this year to be able to create some new money and spread some signing bonus out. But for the sake of keeping things simple, I decided to go the restructure route for Keenan right now. So if you look at Keenan's 2023 numbers, he's due $15.5 million in base salary. $1.5 million of that is fully guaranteed. He's due $2.7 million in signing bonus, which obviously has already been paid, but it's prorated, and a $3.5 million roster bonus, which is due on March 17th of this year if they don't make any changes. So my suggestion is to take $14 million of base salary and his $3.5 million roster bonus and convert it to a signing bonus. What this does is it lowers his cap figure from $21.7 million this year to $12.9 million this year. That's a pretty big chunk of change. You wind up saving yourself $8.75 million this year. What it does though is it takes his salary or his cap number from $25.8 million to $34.5 million next year. You could still cut him. If you cut him, you'd eat $11.5 million basically to save $23 million.
Yep.
So it still makes sense to cut him if you need to after this year. But you're creating enough savings that I think it makes sense to keep him.
Yeah. So let's go back. Take a look. You got Joey Bosa.
So we save $14 million by restructuring Joey Bosa. We save $5 million by restructuring Mike, $7.5 million by restructuring JC Jackson, $6 million by restructuring Linsley, and $8.75 million by restructuring Keenan Allen. Just from those guys, you're creating $41.25 million, and that takes you to $25.5 million in adjusted cap space.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Cap is clean. You've created space. Voila! It's magic.
Everyone's happy.
Yep. And there are some other things they could do here. I mentioned possibly extending Keenan. Garrett and I talked about potentially extending Michael Davis, which makes some sense from a football perspective. They could also approach Khalil Mack about another restructure, although they just restructured him last year. So not sure they'll go that route with him again. It would just create more dead money that they would have to deal with. They could also approach Sebastian Joseph Day about some sort of restructure. So there's other options if they need to create more money. But that gives them about $26 million in cap space, and it should give them what they need to re-sign the guys that we talked about them re-signing. Tranquill, Fox,
That's number 2. Yep. Tranquill number 1. Fox number 2.
Pipkins
number 3, maybe. Yeah. Okay. We did it, Jamie. Well, you did all and shout out to Jamie. He did this spreadsheet that we had talked about the cuts, and I had got to the same players as he did, but he did all the legwork on the numbers. So shout out to Jamie, and it all adds up, and we made it work. And Telesco and Ed McGuire can do the same. Just be like us. So, all right, let's get out of here, Jamie. Hour and a half of free agent Chargers internal free agents. We're done. Appreciate you guys. We will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.